Hello, my name is Pastor Tom, and I am with Grace Community Church, and this is the Salt and Send podcast. It's a weekly podcast where we explore elements from our Sunday morning gatherings, our Wednesday evening gatherings, as well as cultural events and goings on in our community. We hope that this conversation finds you well, and that you will use this podcast as a supplement to your faith and to your local church body that you attend. Thank you for watching and enjoy this episode. All right. Well, welcome back to another episode, episode 18, I believe, of the Salt and Send podcast. What a joy it is to be able to just kind of communicate with our church family week in, week out, just kind of hit different topics and things that might be interesting to us. So if you're new to the show, or this is kind of something you're just checking out, what we try and do is we try and hit some topics that we talked about on our Wednesday night study. We try and dive into some things we talked about Sunday morning that just didn't make it into the sermon, and then we talk about some cultural current events. We might have a guest on. We have some different things going on. But let me introduce to you today, for the first time on the pod, long-time listener, first-time caller, John Beloit. So welcome. Give a quick intro and you're going to hear him, not see him this week. Unfortunately, we had a little technical difficulty, and we'll have him up next week. But go ahead, introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is John Beloit. I'm just stepping in to kind of help Tom with the podcast. It's something that I think is a great opportunity and a great contact point, so we can disciple to more people. And it's something that I really want to see grow and keep going. And so I just felt that if there was something I could do to make this easier and smoother for Tom to not add to his plate, it would increase it'll just make sure that it endures, and I'm looking forward to participating any way I can help.
Very cool. And so yeah, that's the idea. Is here's something we discovered during the event that shall not be named, which is COVID-19, right? We did online church services, and for 8 weeks, our church didn't meet in person. We just had online gatherings, and it really, for me, it reached its crescendo of frustration when I forgot to add a part to our Easter service for the communion. We did communion in a box, and everyone got a box, and they had all the communion stuff in it, and I forgot to add in the actual part where we did communion together. And I went to I was at our house, and I'm sitting there with my cup, and I forgot to do it. And my wife, and the video ended, my wife's like, "What was that about?" And I was like, "I need to go be alone for a little bit." So I just put my stuff down, went and sulked in my room, and then came back and was like, we're going back to in-person gatherings. It was clear to me. I sat up there and prayed for a while, and I was like, you know what? Lord, I don't think this thing is what they told us it was, But during that time frame, when we were out for those 8 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks in, I really was like, you know what? I'm going to start contacting people that I think that, in my experience, just in conversations, weren't afraid of COVID, or were decently healthy. And so if they were willing to meet in person and to do the sermon together, because I just really needed the other person's feedback. And that helped me a lot as a presenter. So we started doing that. And so when John kind of said, "Hey, if there's any way I could help with the podcast, let me know," I was like, "Oh, it'd be great to have even just another person in the room, just so I can bounce off their feedback and kind of hear from that." John, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, as far as COVID goes, I mean, hindsight's always 20/20. It was a tough spot where we had to make some decisions, and I think that we made the right ones. We probably could have come back sooner.
Yeah.
But I think it's us doing that really was the beginning of what we're doing right now. Mm-hmm. It was kind of the first dabble into this type of, well, really, it's its own ministry.
Yeah.
And so I think that there was definitely, God can use anything for his purposes.
Yeah.
And, that's what we're seeing now. But yeah, I think, I forget the original question now.
Oh, like how you feel like having another person in the room affects the...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I always find that I can process my own thoughts better when I'm talking with someone. And I think that it makes it makes you see things that you probably wouldn't have said. If you think of what you want to say internally, when it comes out, a lot of times it doesn't come out how you expect it to. So I think just the act of having someone that you can have a conversation with really helps give you a better view of what you're talking about and be able to think of things in a more clear way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd agree with that. And so, like, because there are times where I'll record something in the podcast, and you'll actually see the edit points, where things cut, because I'm like, okay, that didn't come out the way it sounded it would in my head, so I need to now go back and shift it around. So anyway, what we normally do, we dive into our Wednesday night first, so let's go ahead and jump into that. So chapter 5, Fresh Wind, Fresh Fire. John's been a part of the study with us and on our Wednesday nights, and Jim, we really tried to, with this, one is recognize that this isn't necessarily a traditional Bible study because we're in someone else's writings. Even though it's based on Scripture, we're still actually looking at what someone else is interpreting Scripture as. And so we do want to try and put Scripture up against it a lot, and we try and do that on Wednesday nights, is look at a passage of Scripture that kind of correlates or pairs up, or maybe even isn't necessarily supporting the idea that Jim is making. But we put those ideas in. And we got into chapter 5, where he talked about spiritual dependence. And one of the things that, like, once again, as we kind of have read this book and have come under conviction in some ways about things that we could do better as a church, one of the things that really came forth was like, okay, if we're going to do a time of prayer together, let's actually do a time of prayer together. Not take a few requests, pray real quick, and then study, because then it's not prayer meeting anymore. Now it's something else. So we take our time. We do a lot of praises at the front end. We ask everybody to share a praise if they have something, please share it. Sometimes we have to push a little bit, but we get as many people to share praise, because I believe that's a hunk of prayer, right? Is like looking at the Lord and saying thank you for what you've done. Look at your greatness. Magnifying God together. We read Psalm 34 together every week. And just remind ourselves to give God the glory, taste and see that the Lord is good. And then we dive into, okay, are there any needs that are out in the room right now? We pray through those things. And then at the end of it, we have 10, 15 minutes to actually open the book and talk through it. But we got our prayer time and our praise and worship time done kind of right there at the front end.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the whole theme of the book is the focus should be on prayer.
Yeah.
And I think I really appreciate how we've reoriented the Wednesday night study around that. So
yeah.
We're not just reading it, we're not just learning it, we're actually putting it into practice.
Yeah. And I really feel like it has grown. I don't know if you would agree with this, but the people that are attending, even though many of them known each other for decades at this point, are growing together in new ways because they're taking on one another's needs as their own. They're taking on one another's victories as their own, and are really, really pushing forward. So I've been happy with this. And even though, you'll put a few hours into study, or however long you study, to prepare for it, and then you feel rushed almost in the presentation end. But
well, that's why we have this.
Yeah, and so we can dive deeper. So one of the things we didn't get to in Wednesday was the story, it was a pretty powerful one in here, of a guy named Ricardo. So Ricardo was, and you can fill in any gaps that I miss here, but Ricardo was a kind of I don't know what to call it, a streetwalker, a male prostitute.
A man of the night?
Man of the night, I guess, yeah. But it's actually very odd to me the way that, and we'll talk about this a lot more too, as we get into the book of Hosea, and we look at the spiritual drift of Solomon, actually, which isn't in Hosea, but it parallels how quickly depravity follows after a lot of these, a lot of people that have wealth and prosperity. And the depravity is kind of right up on the backside of that. So, because that was like one of the things that Jim talked about was his daughter was one of the ones doing ministry to these men. They called it the salt mines. So it's a place where, in northern Pennsylvania, we know what, like the salt that they put on the roads, has to be stored somewhere. I don't know if you ever worked when you were doing construction. Did you ever work in a place like on state buildings or anything that housed salt?
No.
I did. So I worked for CBF Contracting. We got on their local business contractor here in our area, and I worked for them for a summer right before college, and we did work on one of their buildings that was that on one of the state buildings that housed salt, and I mean like it was deteriorating weatherproof plywood at a rate that you would not believe. And so, I mean, of course you'd believe it. Like you see what it does to your car.
Yeah,
but they have
terrible from the salt.
Oh my, yeah, everything's torn up. So they, the men would hang out down there because it was kind of a known homeless type of area, and rich and powerful men would come and hire these street men to come, and to do them sexual favors and different things. So his daughter would be doing ministry there. Susan, I think, was her name, and she would see this all the time. But they started inviting this guy by the name of Ricardo, who was, just through drug addiction and having some homosexual tendencies, was caught up in this lifestyle, and would make $500-600 a night, which is even today wild amounts of money. Yeah. He would make crazy amounts of money, but he would very quickly burn that on drugs, and he'd be digging through a dumpster for food. Anything that I missed?
Yeah, well, I think that one of the parts of Jim's story, that when they introduced Ricardo, it wasn't an invitation for him to come to the church. It was, if I remember right, Susan was talking to Jim and expressing her frustration and disappointment from when she was out street evangelizing.
Yeah.
She would be making progress with these guys, and she would feel like she was like almost ready to break through with them. Then all of a sudden a limo would pull up, and they'd be like, sorry, I got to go work. And so she was talking to her dad, Jim, and really kind of pouring her heart out about how disappointing that was. And then a couple days later, here comes, I think they said a couple vans full of these guys, so to come to find out that those seeds that she planted weren't for naught.
And she had had made some headway with these guys, that they were able to come in and to be changed. So there's a couple quotes that I had underlined that just stood out to me in this, and we'll chat through this. But Ricardo begins coming to the church, and it says, it's probably page 79 for you. We have different printings of the book. Ricardo sat in the meetings, and it dawned on him that maybe he could be different. So all of Susan's talk, everything that she's doing with this man, is saying like, hey, in Jesus you can find freedom. In Jesus you don't have to be on drugs. In Jesus you don't have to be in the salt mines doing depraved things for rich men. Like this isn't something you have to be doing. And it says, so Ricardo sat in the meetings. It dawned on him maybe he could be different. This Jesus could actually set him free from crack. Perhaps this Jesus could even change him into a true man, not this half and half person he assumed was his nature. And like what a timely phrase that is for the moment in which we live, where people don't feel like they're the right gender or whatever. And he had been teased from his childhood about being effeminate. His mother had pleaded with him to forsake homosexuality, and he had tried, to no avail. His willpower, catch that, had failed him countless times. And I think any man who has found himself in the clutches of especially sexual sin just has a way of doing that. would resonate with that. Like, how many times has your willpower failed you? You know?
Sure. And this wasn't his. It wasn't like this was the first time someone brought it to his attention that he needed to change his ways. This was obviously something he had tried unsuccessfully at before. So.
And it's not his childhood dream, right?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, you can infer, at least from reading it, that he didn't want to upset his mom.
Yeah.
He didn't want her to be disappointed. He wanted to change, but he just didn't have it. He just couldn't do it on his own. So, and I think that's what makes, really the message of the gospel so powerful.
Yeah.
Is that it doesn't. We can't. We just simply we can't do it on our own.
It's what makes
we don't have to.
Yeah. And well, that's good. What's going to feed into our Hosea conversation isn't necessarily that you can't, but what happens when you start to drift away, because you begin to feel like maybe you can, like maybe I can effectuate change, or maybe I don't really need God that much. Like He shows up in crisis moments, but when things are good, I can hang. So anyway, it goes on and says, but the idea that God was stronger, that God could in fact change him on the inside, that was a new thought. Ricardo kept listening, and after about a month, he gave his heart to the Lord. It was not a dramatic conversation. I'm not even sure when it happened, but it was real on the inside. And this is an argument I make. Okay, so I struggle with the altar call. I struggle with, and we do one, on occasion especially when there's a lot of new faces in the room. Like this past Sunday was Mother's Day. Our normal number's what, 140, 150 that kind of walk in the door on a Sunday morning, something in that ballpark.
Yeah.
We had 184 Sunday morning. So when there's that many new faces in the room, I'm going to present you an opportunity to follow after Jesus Christ. However, I struggle with it because people they begin to assume that if I don't go up front and pray a prayer, then that's how you get saved. It's the prayer that does it for you. And so the issue, I guess, that I'm trying to look at is like when a person says, I believe that I'm going to get up and walk up to the altar, that's the moment of salvation. Right? Not when the prayer is prayed, but when they say, I believe that Jesus is who He said He is. I'm going to go up there and talk to that pastor. And they put action behind what they actually believe. Now, that's your moment of salvation. It's back at the pew when the decision was made. So like I love the way he said that there. It wasn't this dramatic conversion. We didn't even know when it happened, but when it did, it was for real. And I just love the way he said that. But then if you go down a little bit, it says he still had subconscious habits that were being overhauled with instruction from some. It says Terry and others, but some men in the church. Things like, no, Ricardo, don't cross your legs like that. Put your ankle all the way up on the other knee, and it's like, it's just that funny idea of like, that's how women cross their legs. This is how men cross their legs. Like we need to shift the way that you do. And it's funny. Like I have friends, Simon actually crosses his legs like that when he sits, he's our 10-year-old. And I don't think that's girly. However, to a guy who has lived a female lifestyle or has given into very effeminate ways, maybe we do kind of get that in the weeds with it to help him move on. Like, what do you think?
I don't know. I think that the idea of just change, like there can be lots of catalysts for change, but there can also be things that trigger kind of your muscle memory.
Yeah.
To take you back to your, because let's face it, if this is something that he struggled with for that much of his life, that was his default mode.
Yeah.
So I think the intentional changing of habits is really key for long-term change.
Yeah. Even silly habits like how you cross your legs. Like I said, like to most men, if I saw a guy sit that way, I'm not going to say a whole lot to him. But if he's a guy who's trying to come out of a lifestyle, like I'm going to have to say like, hey, nothing against you, but like you might want to cross your legs different, like, because, it's going to, like, if on your way home, if you drove a certain way home and there was the drug dealer that stood on the corner on the way and you could grab drugs, you need to find a new way home.
Right.
It's not necessarily that the road was bad. It's that way led to habits, like you said, muscle memory, that provoked other things. So now, like, even something as silly as crossing your legs one way has to be changed because it's going to provoke other behaviors. Or it could provoke other behaviors, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly has a potential. It could anything could be a trigger. I think in that scenario, you need relationship with the person first. You don't just walk up to some strange guy. And be like, hey, the way you're crossing your legs, you really need to stop that.
Yeah.
But when someone has that degree of vulnerability with you, where you can connect and they know that they see love in your actions, that you want what's best for them, and then you're helping them. You're part of the process of change with them. But it could be anything.
Were you with us last night when we were talking about layers of submission? Were you in that conversation?
I think I got part of it.
Yeah, and so like that's kind of the idea here is like, I'm submitted to Christ. However, I also have this pastor friend that I'm also going to submit to his headship. And then I'm also going to submit to the elders of the church who are going to help walk with me. And when they say don't cross your legs like that, I'll listen to that. I'll ask why and I'll try and figure some things out. But I'm gonna take their advice because I'm gonna intentionally put myself in submission to people that I know, like it's where you say the relationship, where I know they have my best interest at heart. They really want good for me. And so I'm gonna go ahead and just submit myself over to them because like I'm gonna trust in their leadership and their headship here. And I see a lot of like it's just something in the American culture, a little bit of individualism that's built in, which is great. However, it does lend itself to a lack of healthy submission.
Oh, definitely, and I mean, and really that resistance to want to submit. I mean, you can always take that back to pride.
Yeah,
and so it's we've talked lots of times before about what love really looks like. Mm-hmm. Love isn't accepting everything about someone, and I shouldn't say accepting. It's not encouraging someone to just be who they are if what they're doing and the way they're behaving is not good for them.
Right. Right.
So I think that's when we're talking about the submission relationship.
Yeah.
It has to start with the person being willing to submit to someone, and they have to be able to trust that person.
Yeah,
because I mean we live in a society that makes it really hard to trust people.
It does.
So someone can come up and be talking to you that you may have met, out in public somewhere, and you're like, oh, okay. This is a nice guy, and a minute later you realize he's trying to get you to buy something.
Yeah.
The whole interaction was to get something out of you.
Right.
So I think our culture has kind of made people just instinctively be on the defense.
Yeah.
So to get that relationship where someone's willing to submit, it's not just, oh, I walked in the door of this church. That guy's the pastor.
I'm going to do what he says.
Right.
Yeah. And, it's interesting you bring that, like, because it's one of the cultural contexts I want to talk. I don't know where we're ever going to put it in, if it ever gets put in, but it's one on my mind is the flip around that people do at, like, registers. and like everything is tipped. And it's like in places where like I'll walk in for a takeout order somewhere and they're like, here, flip the screen around so I can tip them. And I'm like, this is a takeout. Like I don't tip at McDonald's,
Right.
So anyway, that's like where there is that leeriness of like everyone's trying to get something out of me, And so anyway, so they go through. We'll just shortcut this, but like they go through a whole bunch of stuff with Ricardo, help him walk with the Lord. He comes to marry a young lady, but of course, given his lifestyle and the period of time of, sharing drug paraphernalia, of unprotected sexual intercourse, I meant to say interactions there. So if you want to edit that out, interactions, it's up to you. But he develops HIV. He becomes HIV positive, comes into AIDS, and they had to work through that, which I thought was, I wish he'd lended a little bit more time in the chapter to how did you work together with a young lady saying like, hey, your husband is HIV positive and he's probably going to pass that on to you.
Well, if I remember correctly, he was living in Texas at this point.
Yeah.
So,
because Jim talked about that. He said they worked together on. I guess Jim didn't do that, so that makes sense. Okay, sorry. It said, but with proper guidance and counseling, they established a home together. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, because I think you're right. I think they were down in Texas at that point. But go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying, I presumed that he met her in Texas.
I think so. I think you're right.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense after going through a big change like that. I mean, Texas is pretty far from Brooklyn, to start a whole new life.
Yeah.
But what I think is important is, he still pointed out the challenge that was before him to get to that point.
Yeah. But Jim continues to minister in Brooklyn. Then Ricardo and his wife Betty are in Texas, starting their life together. And Jim gets a call one day that Ricardo's passing on, and it's he would like to talk with Jim before he does. And so, just kind of barely able to speak, but he shares with Jim how thankful he is that the church stood for him and worked with him, introduced him to Jesus. The life he has now is through that. So Jim begins praying for him, that, basically when he gets to heaven, he will be joyful there, and realizes like, no, I think there's more that Ricardo has to offer. So he goes ahead and he dives into prayer, just praying and pleading with God to preserve Ricardo's life. And he then hangs up the phone, asking God to change the direction and to keep Ricardo alive in ways that only God can, because doctors have yet to figure out AIDS and how to beat that. They have found ways to slow it down, but they haven't found a win yet that we know of. If you're a conspiracy theorist, you might be out there like, they figured it out a while ago and they just decided not to tell nobody.
Johnson has a cure.
That's right. Yeah. And so Jim walks, and this is what I love about it. And it's why I was like, it's this stuff that kind of inspired, myself and Tim, they're heading up our Wednesday nights, to say, let's get outside of our normal structure. Because Jim marches into church. So at this point, what's the church, like 1,600 people or something like that are coming on a weekend?
They're thriving. I don't know
it's
how many.
Humongous. And so he walks into the church service and he stops everything. He says, hey, many of you know Ricardo. He's passing away from AIDS. And I'll just read it for you, actually. It says, when I finished praying, I marched directly into the meeting and stopped it. I've just gotten off the phone with Ricardo, whom most of you know. And I said, people looked up expectantly all across the building. I said, he's very sick with AIDS, but I want us to pray for his recovery. And that unleashed a torrent of prayer as people cried out to God for Ricardo. I called Betty, that's Ricardo's wife, 2 days later. Pastor Cimbala, it's incredible, she reported. He went to sleep after the two of you talked, and the next day, all his vital signs had done a U-turn. He began to eat. after taking almost nothing for days. And so you had mentioned the ending of it, which I had forgotten. So what was the purpose behind that? Like,
Well,
that turnaround?
I think, and going back to that moment when Jim brought that to the church to pray about, what I thought was really powerful about that is he didn't just... So from my understanding, he's in his office when he gets this phone call. The church service had already started.
Yeah. He's
still in his office. And, I mean, I'm not a pastor. I'm sure you have, you could, I guess, respect or that time when you're getting prepared.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to want to be just answering a phone call.
Yeah, it'd have to be. My phone's usually off, sitting in the office, but there's people I'll send a voicemail and people I'll answer. You know, and like if it's a number that I look at and I think, even if the service has to wait a few minutes and they do extra testimonies or something, like I'm gonna take the call.
Sure, yeah. But so he's in his office, gets his phone call, and he doesn't just go in and when it's time to pray at the end of the service or however their service flows. He stops what they're doing.
Right.
Like interrupts what they're doing mid whatever it is.
Yeah.
And like, hey, this is happening. You guys remember Ricardo? And
yep.
He had such a powerful story. I could only imagine all the people there that saw the journey that he went through coming to Christ and seeing the change. So I'm sure a lot of them had a soft spot for him.
Yeah.
And just the idea that we're like, okay, there's nothing more important right now than going to the Lord in prayer.
Yeah.
And all of us. So I thought that for me, that was pretty big. I grew up going to a Methodist church, and it is very structured. The churches that I went to, everything was done. Every section took about the same amount of time, and it was kind of not that it wasn't meaningful, but it was cookie cutter in a sense. Yeah. And so to disrupt the entire flow of the service, I thought that was pretty powerful. And for Ricardo, moving forward in his story, he has this just recovery that is absolutely nothing short of a miracle. And I think it says a couple weeks later, like 3 weeks later, he just showed up in New York.
Right.
And they decided to go back to the salt mines, where he spent a significant amount of time in his old life, and they recorded his whole testimony and his transformation. And then I think it wasn't much longer later, another year or two after that, he did finally pass away.
Yeah.
But what was really encouraging is that he was at peace. And him having that extra time to come and record that testimony really was one of the things that helped him, knowing that his testimony would continue. That he was just ready to go be with Jesus.
Yeah.
He was happy for it to be over.
Right. And so that's a good segue. So as we get into the idea of Hosea, one of the things we're going to talk through, Hosea preaches at a time, or he prophesies at a time when Israel is solidly seeking its own desires, and the northern kingdom at least,
right.
And which is Israel at the time. The bottom kingdom was called Judah. So anyway, they're firmly seeking their own desires. They're chasing after other gods. They're doing half-hearted worship to the Lord, as long as they can do it in a way that they desire, not the way God desires. And so they have it. And one of the catalysts of that is wealth, prosperity, military might, that sort of thing. So that's a little bit of what's going on in Israel at the moment. And I look at Jim Cymbala's church at this point, like I said, 1,600 people or so, musical albums that are most likely paying the bills of the church, that like there isn't a need for, like they could not take an offering and probably continue to grow because of the Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir. Like, I don't know, like today people might not really, it's not on the horizon like it used to be, but like it used to be in front of your face like all the time. The Brooklyn Tabernacle was on Christian radio. They were putting albums out. They were doing concerts all over the country. Like, you know, so they had money to spare just from that, you know, record sales, all that. Now, so they have this very prosperous church, but we're still able to keep dependence upon the Lord at the forefront of their, like, because I'm sure Jim could have said, tell you what, Ricardo, we're going to go ahead and we're going to send some money down and get you in a good hospital and find you some, like, because they had the cash for it, right? Mm-hmm. And Ricardo, we're going to do everything we can to get you the best care that we possibly can. They had grief counselors for Betty, and like they probably had they had people on staff, I would argue, that he could have leaned on. But instead he said, unless the Lord intervene here, we're hopeless. And so he went ahead and leaned on the Lord and dove into prayer instead of the prosperity that the church was experiencing. And so like, why was the Brooklyn Tabernacle so successful? Why is this book so impactful? Why is it still echoing now? Like, he wrote this book in what, the 70s? You know, like, or the events were in the 70s at least.
Right.
You know, so like, why was this book so successful? Well, because Jim was able to keep his dependence upon the Lord and not on the trappings of, like, imagine the shoulders that he was rubbing up against at this point in ministry.
Oh, sure.
That he could have leaned on, you know. Hey, I know a guy that can help you out. He's a world-renowned doctor, and he's a friend of the ministry, and you know, like. But Jim kept his heart where it needed to be, and I think that's a big marker of success for them, or why they're so successful. Or remained it that way. All right, so let's take a look at Solomon. All right, so
Solomon or Hosea?
Solomon. So it's in connection with Hosea. So I'll give you a breakdown. Or do you want to do the sermon breakdown, since how much do you remember? You know. But
I think you better take this.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Hosea chapter 1 is where God lays out and pronounces judgment on Israel. And so the way he does that is through a painful prophetic, which is he uses a prophetic picture, is what we would call it in theological circles. But he takes Hosea and he has him marry a lady named Gomer, who is, you know, speaking of prostitutes, that's what she does. And so he marries her, pulls her out of prostitution, gives her a home, gives her love, and provides her with children. So the first child, actually, interestingly enough, the only one listed as born to Hosea. The other ones, it doesn't say that they're Hosea's, but it doesn't say they're not. So there's some speculation there, whether they belong to Hosea or not. But he has his first child, whose name is Jezreel, and that the Lord names that child. That he. It both means to scatter, that God separates, but it also means that the Lord, it's a name of a valley. And so he talks about the valley of Jezreel, which the other name is Armageddon. So it's a very bloody, both in history and in the future, valley and a place of battle where we will align ourselves as enemies of God. And so kind of the conversation we had was, if you are in your sin, if you're continuing to live in rebellion to the Lord, you have aligned yourself as his enemy. Whether you mean to or not, you're like, me and God, I have nothing against the Lord. Like, I'm sorry, buddy, you're on the wrong side of the field. Now, all it takes to get to the other side of the field is to accept salvation that Jesus offers. And that's what was interesting about the conversation was Hosea's name means salvation. And so the Lord sent to them in the midst of their rebellion salvation. And this offer that they can turn their hearts and they can come to the Lord. So that was our conversation Sunday in a nutshell, was that it ended with that idea of like there's the Lord names it Jezreel's the first kid, the next one's name is No Mercy, the next one's name is not my children or not my child. And so it's this kind of build that the Lord lays out these children, but then he says, surely I will draw you back into myself. So there's Jezreel being brought back in. And he's like, and who is not my child will be called children of God. And so there's us being brought back into that relationship. And, where I said there's no mercy, I will have mercy. And so he's saying like, hey, turn to me, come in salvation, and I will not visit these judgments upon you.
One of the things that's cool about the Jezreel, and I don't speak Hebrew, but my understanding is the Hebrew word that it means scatter, but it also means sow.
Yeah.
So in his name alone, there's kind of the redemptive process,
right,
which I think is cool.
Yeah, and that's why like how much. Anytime God names someone, you better pay attention to that, and so you just see the Lord's favor in the midst of that. That yes, in the way that there is scattering, there can also be a harvest from that, and it's one of those conversations where it's like God's going to get the glory from your life no matter what. It's either going to come through His love and His grace and His mercy, or it's going to come through His justice. But one way or the other, He's going to receive glory for your life, and so I'd rather it be love and grace and mercy myself. And so what I wanted to do was take this idea of Hosea, this picture of Hosea that he lays out, this cycle of sin and redemption and deliverance that we see, and actually look at, because one of the questions I asked Sunday was, how do nations slowly drift away from the Lord? Because it didn't happen all at once in Israel. It happened when Jeroboam II came in, and he brought some idol, or Jeroboam the first came in and brought idols in, and so a prophet from Judah came up and he prophesied against him. Jeroboam the first reached out his hand to grab the man, and his hand withered up, and the altar split in half. And so this guy pushed back on him, but Jeroboam persisted. And then 13 kings later, and that's not necessarily 13 generations, right? Like, because some kings were like a couple of years and then he'd get killed or something like that. But
right. Jeroboam the second was the king for
Hosea. Yeah.
How long was he king?
Oh, I read it, but I don't remember now.
It was a long time, but it wasn't something that was shockingly long.
Right.
But he had been the longest ruler that they had had.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and actually was through a handful of prophets. Actually, kind of had come and gone. So, and Hosea was around for several kings too, which was interesting. So, anyway, but he comes to Jeroboam II and he tells him, "Hey, you need to walk away from these things." But the people had slowly accepted the rebellion, and because, in large part, things were prosperous enough that they kind of started to believe, you know what, maybe God's good with it. Like, He hasn't brought judgment. Because I think that happens to all of us, where we step outside of what God's design is, and then when we aren't immediately reprimanded, we're like, maybe this isn't so bad, right? And we start to convince ourselves of things.
Well, yeah, and I think, if you have kids,
yeah,
like you see that testing,
yeah,
so often they do something that they're a little nervous about, they think they're getting in trouble, and then they don't get in trouble.
Right.
Well, the next time they don't even hesitate.
Right.
And then if they get in trouble for it,
you let me do it last time.
Yeah, they're upset with you.
Right.
And honestly, there's something to that. Mm-hmm. As a parent, you need to take responsibility for that as well. But this, I guess it doesn't really relate to this situation in particular.
Well, I mean, if you tell your kid not to do something and then they do it anyway and you don't reprimand that, then they begin to feel like maybe that's okay. And then when, like, you know, an analogy I would use is I don't have any hair now, but when I used to, in college, Liberty had their dress code, and there was hair length. Men couldn't have hair that touched their collar or their ears. So you had to wear a collared shirt, and it couldn't touch your ears or your collar. Well, over the course of the year, like, I was too poor for a haircut, so I just didn't get one. And my hair had got down to where it was touching my ears. And on the day of the final, my professor was like, hey, your hair's touching your ears. You need to leave the classroom. You can't be in here. And I'm like, you allowed it all, like, you've allowed it for the last couple weeks, you know, and now suddenly you're calling me on it. Like, and it felt like selective enforcement of rules, you know, or very convenient enforcement. And so, but at the same time, like, I probably should have accepted his grace and cut my hair, you know, but so I went home and I shaved my head and came back and took my final.
And it's been this way ever since.
Yeah, and here we are. Yeah, so never grew back. So I attribute my hair loss to him. Yeah, it's his fault. No, he was a good professor. It's just like, you know, I never forgot it.
Yeah, but the idea is, if we do something we shouldn't do, and we continue to prosper, or you know, we don't get reprimanded, that's we shouldn't think that, okay, now that's not wrong anymore.
Yeah,
you know, what's wrong is wrong. And especially when we talk about the gradual change, it's not overnight. It's not one event, you know.
Yeah, it's not like there's a switch that was flipped and suddenly everyone is doing their own thing. And that's why I wanted to bring up the story of Solomon. And so it was actually one you suggested, and I was like, oh man, that's a great suggestion. So Solomon began with incredible amounts of humility. In fact, his wisdom is derived from his humility, because the Lord said to him, hey, you have sought me over all things, so I will give you anything you ask for. And his request wasn't for riches or whatever. It was for wisdom so that he could lead well, you know. And so the Lord said, it's actually in 1 Kings 3, he said, verse 3, and Solomon loved the Lord and walked in the statutes of David his father, and only he sacrificed and made offerings in the high places. And so the Lord comes to him and he says, hey, what would you like? I'll give you anything, whatever it is you want. And in verse 9 it says, give your servant therefore an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. So it's this wisdom that he was seeking and asking for. And the Lord is so pleased with that answer that he gives him the wisdom he wants and the prosperity, you know, that he would desire as well as a king. And because of the humility of his heart. But like you said earlier, pride starts walking in the door, and then, you know, self-reliance is usually holding its hand. So small compromises began. So even though he's following the Lord, even though he stands in wisdom, Solomon has tolerated things he should not have. He began to make, actually it's in 1 Kings as well, Solomon made a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David. And then it goes on and says, only the people were sacrificing at the high places, because no house had yet been built for the name of the Lord. Now, that's interesting. So the idea is, we can't worship the Lord, and I don't want to get into how do the Jews today have remission of sin without blood sacrifice. And the argument is, what's that?
There's no temple.
There's no temple. That's the argument. But let me ask you this. Historically, is a temple necessary in order to have sacrifices and worship God?
I mean, certainly not. I mean, you hear time and time again in the Old Testament, people go somewhere and they build an altar.
Yep.
So.
Yep. And what about the tabernacle throughout the wilderness. That they built a tent. They have it. We're going to have this temporary place while we build the house of God. We're going to worship in that.
Right. The temple was mobile.
Yeah.
I mean, that was their temple.
Yeah, because it's what they had to work with in the time, and the Lord was happy to take, as long as their heart was pure and they were seeking to honor Him and to have remission of sin. Absolutely, meet us here, and He did, and so that prosperity slowly kind of began to chip away, even though He's in the process of building the temple and doing different things. So He ignores God's commands. That specifically warned Israel's kings not to take on extra wives and align with other nations. It was but like we talked about earlier, some of those gifts were pretty legit, or they were very advantageous alliances that I could make. And so he began to do that. And this is why we're probably commanded to avoid the love of money. That it's when it begins to pull at your desires that maybe it's beginning to have an adverse effect on you. Actually, I would argue attaching emotion to money in any form or fashion isn't wise. Fear of money can cause you to make foolish decisions too. It's I have no emotional attachment to my hammer, right? Or my screwdrivers at my house. None. If I lose one, I'm like, oh, okay, I'll go get another, because they're a tool, and they have a specific purpose, and if they break, they break, and I'll replace it. And I look at money that way. Money's a tool. Don't attach emotional attachments to it. When you do, it turns out bad. What do you think?
Yeah, I think a problem with money is people, you've probably heard the expression when people say money can't buy happiness.
Sure.
Be like, yeah, but it can buy the stuff that makes me happy.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's, it definitely holds true, throughout time. But I feel like the relationship with money probably would have been different back then.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, I mean, here, if you have money, you don't lift a finger.
Yeah.
Unless
you want to. Yeah.
Right. But back then, it was used for normal commerce, to buy your necessities, to buy your food if you needed food, and not even that, to buy the grain to grow your own food.
Right.
And now it's about buying stuff that you think brings you joy.
Yeah.
But really, it's just you're paying money for distractions.
Yeah. Here's the other hard part about money is that it costs in order to have it, I must sacrifice a part of my life. Especially if you're on an hourly pay system.
Sure.
I have to give up an hour of my one life in order to have this amount of money, and I'm making that exchange. And so there is an attachment there, in very similar to the way that you're attached to hours of your own life, is because it costs that to have it, And so I understand why there is an attachment there. I just it's something I have to constantly remind myself of. It. Money's not evil, but it's also not the love of my life either. It's when I fall in love with it that evil things happen through my heart, not because the money's just a tool at my disposal at that point. But Deuteronomy 17, the Lord said, only he must, speaking of kings, he must not acquire many horses for himself, and he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver or gold. Well, Solomon went ahead and he acquired excessive horses and excessive wives and excessive silver and gold, and then sure enough, wouldn't you believe it, his heart was turned away, and so slowly, due to the influence of his wives, his heart begins to turn away from the Lord and towards outright idolatry. In fact, it says in 1 Kings 11, Solomon loved many women. He had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 concubines. And his wives turned away his heart. And so if you notice, his heart wasn't turned away quickly. Like you said, it wasn't like suddenly one day he's like, you know what, I'm going to start worshiping some idols. It was slowly that over time he began to worship other things. And in verse 4, 1 Kings 11, verse 4, it says, "For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David, his father." So yeah, what say you? Solomon's heart turned slowly.
Yeah, a verse just came to my mind when you were talking about it. This is actually one of my favorite proverbs, and I just looked it up online, so I don't know what version it is, but it's Proverbs 30,
Okay.
8 and 9. It's, "Remove far from me falsehood and lying. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me, lest I be full and deny you.
Yeah.
And say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God."
Yeah.
So that's
That's pretty on the nose.
right.
Yeah.
It's
Let me be neither poor nor rich or wealthy or whatever it said. Yeah. Like there's, when we attach things to money, desperation, when I'm desperate for money, and not desperate for the Lord, Jim said, it's just this attachment that seems to take over.
Well, I think everybody can relate to, if maybe not being desperate for money, but really desiring money. But I mean, how many times have you prayed, "Please don't make me rich"?
Yeah.
I don't think that's part of someone's normal prayer repertoire.
Yeah. No, you're right. And it is a very clear example or I don't know, demonstration of where we are as a people. That money is one of the things that really has our hearts right now. And because we are in a, thankfully, I'm thankful that I'm in a prosperous nation where, if I have need for something, there's a good chance I can earn enough to go get it. Certainly there's things that you can't, health issues or whatever, but, and I don't have a speedboat, but I don't have need for one, so
Right.
but all my needs are met. I'm going to go fill my gas tank because I have money in my account to fill my gas tank. Now I can't drive too much because I don't have that much money, but there's money enough in the account to fill the gas tank. And so, this is what happens. Like in Solomon's day, they were so prosperous and they're so wealthy that they had no need for anything, and it ended up pulling their dependence off of the Lord and putting it on themselves. Pride enters the conversation. They start worshiping other gods, and the Lord has to bring judgment. So here's what God says to him. This is the judgment that comes at the end of this. "And the Lord was angry with Solomon, and this is verse 9 through 12, because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods." So this is a conversation God had with Solomon. Do not do this. And Solomon's like, "I'm going to do it anyway." And so, because,
Where's the wisdom there?
well, yeah, but probably because he's more afraid of his wives than he is of God. That's where it was at. But he did not keep what the Lord commanded. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, "Since this has been your practice, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes that I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and give it to your servant. Yet, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it in your days, but I will tear it out of the hands of your son." So, because so Solomon's living on borrowed faithfulness. The faithfulness of David, Solomon's living inside of the faithfulness of David, and he's enjoying the benefits of the faithfulness of his dad. And God is holding promises that he held with his dad. And so one day when Solomon's gone, the Lord's going to go ahead and bring the judgment down that Solomon had kind of brought on himself. But because of his father, the Lord honored that relationship, which is super interesting to me. But I look at us and I look at think about the men who went before, the women who came before us. faithful servants of the Lord, forged a nation out of nothing, stood on principle. Actually, we had, it was an interesting conversation with some guys, some of the younger guys Sunday morning, are talking through some history stuff. And I was like, do you know that the early drafts of the Declaration of Independence freed the slaves? And it was taken out because they couldn't get it through the colonies. And some of the southern colonies were like, that'll bankrupt us. We can't do that. And so Thomas Jefferson had to remove it, And so, but it's in the first couple of drafts, he had emancipation built in, or abolition built in, and it's that kind of idea that because of the time period in which he lived, he had to pace himself. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Even though he was a man who held slaves. So I understand these men did something that I don't know a single person alive today that could do what they did. Right. When they forged the nation out. And I wonder how much borrowed faithfulness we're living on today.
Well, that's the thing with Solomon. It wasn't because he messed up. It's because he made it his practice.
Right. Yeah, and we talked about that last night actually at Ovi's house. We had a get together, guys get together last night, and everyone trips and falls. They use language they wouldn't normally use in a moment of stress, or they're scrolling the internet and then an image pops up and they linger a little longer than they ought to, and they confess and repent and move on. But when it's a practice, when it's something that is constant, daily, this is something I do in my life, that's something you really want to come at very differently than the occasional slip up, and so because the practice indicates a dependence upon something other than the Lord, and so this is where Solomon had found himself. It's exactly what you said, since this has been your practice, right? And so the judgment came. But Solomon lived on David's faithfulness and the borrowed David's faithfulness. But through compromises, misplaced affections, success, but not watching your back on that, he gradually drifted away. And do you think this is why most, or many, I'd say most, I've never counted, many of Solomon's proverbs speak towards guarding your heart? Did he see this in himself and then write these things down?
I mean, surely there has to be a part of it. But coming from the wisest man ever to live,
right?
I mean, I'd say that's probably pretty good advice. And through his, we learn more a lot of times from doing things wrong.
Yeah.
And, it's, I think you said before, there's the effective and the efficient way to learn things.
Yes.
You would have to believe that he would have reflected on how he got to where he was.
Yeah.
And if whatever he would pinpoint as an integral thing to protect, to avoid the mistakes that he made, essentially.
Yeah.
I would have to say that it absolutely was something he was viscerally and emotionally feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, and to kind of go backwards towards Hosea, that's a very private thing that Solomon wrestled with. The world didn't see that wrestle match. Maybe some did, some people close, but for the most part, that wasn't something people experienced. And so then when he writes it in Proverbs, it comes out very theoretical. like it for Solomon, it's super personal, but to the reader, it's theoretical. Think about where did I see that? I had Proverbs 4:23. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the springs of life. And people read that and they go, "Oh yeah, that's fair. That's nice." When in reality, that was born out of pain for Solomon. And so this is why, like in Hosea, we want to talk for a second about the prophetic picture versus an analogy or an allegory, because a lot of people will argue and they'll say, you know what, this whole marrying Gomer and having children thing, I don't think that's real. I think that who names their daughter Gomer? That's not even nice. Like we don't think it's a real thing. This is an allegory. It's most likely just a story that Hosea told to paint a picture. When I would argue that Hosea lived this life so that the people around him would feel the pain he's feeling, and then would also at the same time understand this is the pain we're causing the Lord when we seek after other gods and we don't live in faithfulness to him.
Yeah, how is Hosea going to truly be able to express this message on a hypothetical story?
Yeah.
Without having an experience to be able to relate that to. And oh my, what a way to really have someone express or feel anguish than to put him in that situation knowingly. And well, I mean, we'll see how that plays out as we move through Hosea. But I think it was critical for Hosea to feel the hurt, feel the disappointment. He had to have been crushed. Yeah. Just absolutely devastated and crushed time and time and time again.
Right.
Like you said, we don't even know. It's likely Jezreel was his only biological child. Yeah. We don't know that.
Right.
But
I'd also argue that Gomer's not taking the kids with her whenever she runs away. So she's leaving Hosea with little ones, and some of them potentially aren't even his. Or the doubt is at least there, whether they're his kids or not. How does he know? I mean, if she's running around and as a prostitute, so there's really no way he can know for certain if these kids belong to him or not.
Well, it doesn't say it, but I think God tells him.
Yeah,
in their names.
Right, not my people.
If nothing else.
Yeah, not my people is on the nose a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, so for it to just be allegory or just, I don't think that he would have been able to present the message with the same fervor. Yeah. And from the same heart, too. Right. It would be... It would be different for him to just be angry with the Northern Kingdom and come at them with that righteous, drive. But after he had his heart broken the way that the Most High was with Israel, that would be the only way for him to truly be able to express that with any to get anywhere close.
Yeah. So that leads me to the cultural conversation, which doesn't have to be long because we've just talked about all of it. So America is in that spot, right? We're extremely prosperous. We have incredible military might. We have elected leaders that our nation is pretending are our saviors when they are not. We have mixed worship where we're watching as the church has become a hub not of biblical adherence, but certainly of ideological bents. and where your pet or preferred ideology, you can find a church that will affirm that and worship and celebrate that. So we kind of see this moment where we take great pains to be as pure to Scripture as humanly possible. So, like, I understand we're in a rural culture where I don't know too many people who vote Democrat. Like, I just don't know many. And Sunday morning stood on stage and said, Donald Trump isn't your savior, right? Which, like, even, like, made the joke, but it's not really a full joke. It's like a joke with some truth, which is, like, don't get your pitchfork out, just hear me out. Sure. Because people will get upset. We've got folks in the church that are big time Trump supporters. Mm-hmm. And but once again, the Lord hasn't scooted over to give Donald Trump room on the throne. That he is, and I said it on a podcast like 3 weeks ago, that you have one Savior and it's Jesus Christ. And so even in good Bible believing Christian churches, there's a heart towards towards worship of these individuals, and it's hard to overcome that. Yeah. Yep. I mean, just from a cultural context, and like I look at Hosea and kind of what he went through and what he experienced, where he's like, hey, you're drifting, you need to return. And like even today in church today, like I've said it for a while, tongue in cheek a little bit, but it's honest. I think what's going to get me canceled online has already been said. I just need to make someone mad enough to dig for it.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And so I'm willing to accept, and we're just a small church, so most likely I'm not going to get anyone that mad. But but the reality is that people like to worship what they want to worship, and so we as a nation are in the midst of that moment, which is very similar to what Hosea preached against, and so when I stand on stage and I say, "Hey, everyone, Clarion County, let's return to Jesus Christ. Let's turn from our sin. Let's walk in faithfulness," I'm labeled intolerant or a bigot or racist or whatever that is, to whatever ist they're going to try and throw at me because I spoke out against the LGBT community. And I'm not speaking out against the LGBT community. I'm speaking out against the ideology.
Right.
But when you make ideology an identity, that's when things get all screwed up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, all right, what do we have going on? So what's in the haps coming up? So we have our men's group. Stay tuned for that. Not this coming Thursday, but the next one after our men's group meets, and hopefully, fingers crossed, I don't know. I'm not super confident. We've got Tim. We have our associate pastor heads up our men's ministry, and he's kind of an old school guy. When he preaches, he has handwritten notes, like he's very old school. Actually, I had to teach him today how to share a contact with me on his phone. Like he had it, he had it mixed up.
Does he have an iPhone?
He does, yeah.
Okay.
Super easy, but like he was struggling with it, and so we help him through the technology stuff, and I think he's worried he's going to be responsible for something techie up here, and that's not the case, or that he's going to do or say something he shouldn't do or say, which is possible.
Yeah, we can edit it out.
Yeah, we can always edit it out. And so he so I think we got him convinced, but he didn't sound enthusiastic about it.
No.
And then so we have our men's group that meets, and our ladies meet with us at the same time, and we do dinner, do a little bit of fellowship together, and then we separate out, and men kind of have their own teaching, women have their own teaching time, and it's a good time. Is this a youth week coming up this Sunday, a youth Sunday as well?
Yes.
We
didn't have it this Sunday.
Right. So our student ministry meets every other Sunday night. So they'll be gathering together from 6 to 8 here at the church. Games, food, and good teaching, small groups with our teenagers. So if you have a kid, what's the age group? 6th through 12th grade?
Yeah.
Yeah, so 6th through 12th grade, middle school, high school, and then they split up. I think they split up by age group and gender, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it depends on how many kids are there.
Oh yeah. What groups are there? So, but they have different small groups and they hang out. So, great time. Bring your student. Is there anything else going on that you can think of that we need to? We just came off the Mother's Day dinner, which was awesome, and then.
Yeah, I mean, we got church softball's coming up.
Yeah, church softball's coming up. Yeah, so
Exciting.
if you're out there and you're just listening to this and you're part of the Grace Online church and you're like,
We'll take you.
I could play. Yeah, we don't play digital softball. It's for real softball. So please come out and play some softball with us. But do we practice or we just roll into games?
Well, the first game is June 2nd. I know that.
Okay.
I think, is it Zach announced it at church?
Yeah, Zach did the announcements this week. And
He had mentioned wanting to have a couple practices.
yeah, that'd be cool.
But,
So anyway, yeah. And then, of course, our kids' camp is coming up. We're still looking for at least one more counselor, male or female, so we could take either way. And get your kids signed up as soon as you can. And we'll do kids camp big. But the spots are filling up fast, and when they're full, they're full. So we fill the camp to capacity every year. So if your kid hasn't signed up for kids camp, go ahead and get them signed up for that. All right, that is all, and I will catch up with you guys on the next one. See you soon.